This is In Other Words. I'm Gregory Donaghy, and this week we focus on the global threat analysis from intelligenceanalysis.org for week ending June 6, 2026. The world is becoming more fragmented, not more stable. Conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East remain active. Europe is tightening its migration posture, and cyber and maritime pressure continue to sit in the background as constant sources of risk. The bigger story is that the global system is becoming harder to manage, costlier to operate in, and less forgiving when things go wrong. That matters because the threats are no longer isolated. They are feeding each other. Military escalation is affecting shipping routes, migration policy is shaping domestic politics, cyber operations are shadowing geopolitical tension, and infrastructure is carrying more of the burden of conflict than it used to. For governments, companies, and security planners, the message is simple. The operating environment is getting rougher, and the margin for error is shrinking. Let's start with Ukraine, because it remains the clearest example of how this war is changing. Russia has continued to launch heavy missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian cities, including Kiev, Dnipro, Kharkiv, and other major targets. These strikes are not only destructive in the immediate sense, they are also designed to wear down Ukrainian resilience, pressure air defenses, and force the country to spend time, money, and attention on survival rather than recovery. At the same time, Ukraine has expanded its own strike campaign against Russian logistics and fuel systems. That is important. It shows that the war is increasingly being fought through system disruption, not just through the movement of ground forces. Fuel, transport, rear area command nodes, and industrial support infrastructure are now central to the conflict. Whoever can sustain those systems better has the advantage. This is why diplomacy remains secondary to military leverage. There may be talk of talks, and there may even be messages about possible openings, but neither side is acting as if a near-term settlement is likely. Moscow is still betting on air power and pressure. Kiev is still trying to raise the cost of occupation and weaken Russia's ability to keep fighting. That means the war is not moving toward resolution. It is moving toward a more violent form of attrition. And there is a wider effect here. Every major strike cycle in Ukraine now has spillover potential. It affects energy markets, defense planning, border security, and the political mood across Europe. It also reinforces the sense that long wars are being normalized again. Moving next to the Middle East, where the pattern is similar. No clean ending, only managed instability. Lebanon remains a key pressure point. Ceasefire diplomacy exists, but it is fragile. Hezbollah's rejection of a new framework, combined with ongoing Israeli operations, shows that implementation is the hard part. A ceasefire on paper means little if the armed actors shaping events on the ground do not see restraint as in their interest. Gaza remains part of the same strategic picture. It is not separate from the Lebanon issue, and it is not separate from the Iran file. The region is linked by proxy relationships, escalation thresholds, and the constant possibility that one front will spill into another. This is what makes the Middle East so dangerous right now. The region may not be in a full regional war, but it is still operating under continuous tension. That tension is enough to matter. It affects energy pricing, shipping confidence, insurance, and diplomatic bandwidth. It also creates room for miscalculation. When everyone is probing, signaling, and warning, the risk of a mistake rises. The key point is that stability in the Middle East is now measured less by statements and more by behavior. If proxy forces are active, if strikes continue, and if ceasefires require constant enforcement, then the underlying risk remains high even when headlines soften. Now to Europe, where migration has become a security issue in its own right. The move toward return hubs is a strong signal that European governments are treating migration not only as a humanitarian question, but as a political and operational one. The idea is straightforward. If people ordered to leave the bloc can be transferred to centres outside the EU, then governments gain a new enforcement tool. But the political meaning goes deeper than the mechanics. This is about domestic pressure. It is about voter fatigue, border control, and the perception that states need firmer tools to manage movement. It is also about the tension between sovereignty and rights. Supporters see it as a practical answer to a difficult problem. Critics see it as a path toward abuse, legal controversy, and the externalization of responsibility. There are also second-order effects. Transit states become more important. Smuggling networks adapt. people movers and criminal intermediaries begin looking for new routes, new loopholes, and new forms of leverage. In other words, harder policy does not eliminate the problem, it changes the shape of the problem. What is most important for this audience is that migration is increasingly being treated as a security instrument. It is not just a social or humanitarian issue anymore, it is part of border politics, state capacity, and internal stability. That means migration policy now sits in the same conversation as defense, policing, and strategic resilience. Next, on to cyber and maritime risk. Cyber incidents remain frequent, and many of them are linked directly or indirectly to state behavior. That is what makes cyber so different from ordinary crime. It is not just about theft or disruption, it is part of how states compete below the threshold of open conflict. The targets are usually the ones that matter most: government systems, finance, energy, transport, communications, and critical infrastructure. At the same time, shipping remains under pressure from the wider geopolitical environment. Routes are still being reshaped by conflict, risk premiums remain elevated, and companies continue to face longer transit times and higher operating costs. That creates a slow but persistent drag on trade. This is where the business relevance becomes clearest. Cyber and maritime risk are not side stories. They are the channels through which geopolitical pressure becomes commercial pain. A disruption in one region can create delays, price spikes, compliance costs, and insurance changes in another. That is why companies that think geopolitics is only a government issue are missing the point. The broader lesson is that systems are now exposed in layers. A port can be hit by a cyber incident, then stressed by rerouted shipping, then affected by labor pressure or regulatory change. These threats do not have to be dramatic to matter. They just have to keep accumulating. Regional synthesis. Zooming out, the regional picture is one of connected pressure. East Asia remains a managed coercion theater, especially around the South China Sea. The key issue there is not whether a full war is imminent, but whether repeated friction keeps normalizing confrontation. Even without a major crisis, insurance, freight, and alliance signaling are already being affected. Africa matters through the maritime system. Rerouted shipping has turned African ports, bunkering hubs, and coastal routes into strategic pressure points. That makes the continent more important to global logistics than many headline cycles suggest. It also raises exposure to piracy, corruption, and illicit maritime activity. Central America and South America remain crucial network zones for organized crime and trafficking. They are part of the global map of drug movement, migrant smuggling, and illicit finance. These are not isolated regional problems. They connect directly to North America and Europe through ports, air routes, and criminal supply chains. North America, meanwhile, remains a sanctions and policy actor with global impact. Washington's choices still shape the Ukraine file, the Russia pressure campaign, and the broader tone of alliance management. Even when the immediate crisis is elsewhere, the United States remains central to how the system responds. The important thing to understand is that these regions are not separate boxes. They are linked theaters in a single strategic environment. The strategic implications are straightforward but serious. First, infrastructure, logistics, and digital systems are the main vulnerable nodes. That includes ports, energy networks, transport corridors, industrial controls, and government systems. These are the points where geopolitical risk becomes real operational disruption. Second, resilience now matters as much as capability. Military power matters, so does deterrence. But the ability to absorb shocks, reroute quickly, recover systems, and keep operating under pressure is now just as important. Governments and firms are being judged not only on power, but on endurance. Third, route diversification is no longer optional in many sectors. If a shipping lane, port, or corridor becomes unstable, businesses need alternatives. That adds cost, but the cost of not preparing is higher. Fourth, governments and firms are operating in the same risk environment, even if at different scales. A cyber hit, a port delay, a sanctions change, or a migration shock can affect both public policy and private operations within days. The line between national security and commercial risk has become much thinner. What to watch next? The next watch point is Russian retaliation. If Moscow responds more aggressively to Ukraine's strike campaign, The risk of broader escalation rises quickly. The second is Lebanon. The question is not whether ceasefire language exists, it is whether it actually holds in practice. The third is Europe's migration implementation. If return hubs begin to move from policy to practice, that will shape domestic politics across the bloc and put pressure on transit states. The fourth is shipping disruption. Any new pressure in the Red Sea around Africa or in the South China Sea will matter quickly for trade and insurance. The fifth is cyber escalation. If geopolitical tensions rise, cyber activity often rises with them, especially against infrastructure and finance. In closing, the main lesson from this week is not that the world is collapsing, it is that the world is entering a more contested kind of stability. Conflicts are harder to end, pressure is more distributed, and the systems that keep trade, security and politics functioning are under more strain than before. That is the environment now. Prolonged contested stability. Harder, costlier, and less forgiving. That's it for this week. Join me next Sunday wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, have a great week.